Well, welcome to Talking Chi, where it's all about the energy. If everything is made of energy, then we have a lot to discuss. So let's get into it. We've got I'm happy to have my co-hosts today, Nona, my partner, and Tony Khalife joining us as well. And our guest today is Jeff Patterson, a longtime martial arts student and teacher, and author of the book The Yielding Warrior. And we're so excited to be talking about this concept of yielding and the energy of yielding and looking at how we can actually extrapolate that concept and use it in our everyday lives, which is what we hope for with our practices. Let's go ahead and do ask Jeff for an introduction, and then also what prompted him to write this book on the Yielding Warrior.
Welcome, Jeff.
Welcome.
Hello, thank you. It's great to be here. Yeah, I've been dabbling with writing for years, and I've written a couple books prior to this. However, when the first COVID shutdown came, I was not sure if I was going to be able to keep my academy. Everything was, I didn't, you never knew how long it was going to last or what was going on. And so in that first 2 or 3 months, I built out a online program, the Yielding Warrior online program for personalized meditation practices, as well as a teacher training program. And then I wrote the Yielding Warrior. And my goal with the Yielding Warrior was to write 8,000 words a week until I had about 80,000 words. So I knocked that out in about 9 or 10 weeks, and then it took about 2 years of editing it before it finally became published, and that's how the book came to life.
That's good discipline there.
Yeah, it sounds like you layered that approach of practice to it to complete the task and the book. But how about the background and what prompted you to think about this concept of yielding, and how were you introduced to this yielding concept?
Yeah, so I got turned on to the meditative arts in a bit of a roundabout way. When I was 19, 20 years old, I was really into Western boxing. And I used to train 5, 6 days a week. I attended a boxing gym that was only maybe 3 or 4 blocks down the street from my academy here. And at the time in Portland, this is back like in 90, 91 timeframe, it was really the only boxing gym in town for pros and amateurs to go train at. And in a boxing gym, if you're not familiar with how it works, it's not like a traditional martial art class where you come in and everybody works with the Sifu or the teacher who is ever training, and everybody follows along with what they're doing. In a boxing gym, usually there's 4 or 5 coaches around, and each one of those coaches has their own stable of fighters, if you will, maybe 5 or 6 guys that they work with pretty consistently, and that's their main focus. Well, when I got to this gym, there was one coach there who had actually created national and world champion level fighters. And I really wanted him to get to notice me. I wanted to get to spend some time with him. So I would always show up at the gym when I knew he was going to be there, and be really disciplined, work hard and let him try to notice me. And it took about 3 or 4 months before he finally started paying any attention to me. And once he started helping me out a little bit, he said something to me that changed my life forever. And that was that he said, if you want to be a good boxer, you should start doing meditation and Tai Chi. And, here I am, this 19, 20-year-old kid thinking, isn't that for like old people in the park? How's that going to help me be a better fighter? And I had a lot of respect for him, though, and I wanted to follow his path. And so I started taking on the practice, and it changed my life in many ways. And, one of the concepts of doing the meditative arts is the yielding concept, which is kind of where that was all derived from.
I'm happy to have the co-host jump in at any time if you guys have something you want to respond to or um, extra expand on.
Yeah, absolutely. I listened to some of your interviews with podcaster, and you mentioned that you were in the Marine Corps, and I'm interested in finding out, see how being in well, first if you've been in combat, and how the experience in the Marine Corps has kind of shaped your vision of what it is like to come back to a more yielding aspect, as opposed to what we know about the Marines. They run where the bullets are coming from. So just if you can give us a little bit of a background on your military training and how that shaped your reality and coming together for the yielding warrior.
Yeah, so I was in the military for, I joined when I was 17, just got out of high school, and I went to the first Gulf War, and it was a little bit of a shock coming back after the war, trying to get back into society. And at the time, I wished I had more of these meditative and yielding skills to kind of help with that transition. Um, I think that what really helped me kind of integrate back into things was the martial arts and having something positive to follow coming out and back into society. And at the time, when I got back from the first Gulf War, I was also a college student, and I was teaching martial arts at the time to help pay my way through school. And so that was kind of a positive force I had in my life that really helped me go down the right path, if you will.
I hear. Mhm. Fantastic. Have you
I,
sustained any personal injuries or any gunshot wounds or anything that kind of created for you a more compassionate view? Because what I'm understanding from about the yielding warrior, it's a pretty compassionate and pretty loving place to be in order to arrive at, in order to make that system itself become really effective. It requires a big heart. It requires a very very rooted individual to be able to execute such wealth of compassion in order to have that yielding process come through.
Yeah, so I was not wounded in war. However, the idea of yielding, a lot of times it's misinterpreted a little bit, and so I break down yielding into three areas. We have physical yielding, mental yielding, and emotional yielding. And physical yielding is the easiest one, especially for martial artists to see because we use it all the time. You know, it's the idea that I push you, you push me, whoever's the bigger, stronger person with the most leverage is going to eventually push the other person over. But with yielding, instead of us trying to see who the bigger meathead is, when you push me, I get out of the way of that force. And so now I can respond with less effort. So I'm not trying to butt heads with you and see if I'm bigger and stronger than you. Now, in order for that to be something that I can reach a high level in, a lot of things have to come in internally for me to reach that stage. And one, I need to be well rooted. The lower part of my body needs to be strong and flexible so I can change my central equilibrium without getting tight. The body has to be relaxed, the breath has to be calm, and the mind has to be present. It takes years and years to get to a high level of this, but when you do, it's pretty interesting because now you can start learning how to see things on a more subtle level and make more educated choices under pressure, not putting yourself in a vulnerable position. You know, it's obvious how this is helpful in martial arts, but it's also helpful in any form of athletics. You know, you look at a lot of professional athletes, they're practicing the meditative arts. And one of the reasons why they do that is to develop these skills and that heightened sense of awareness so they can perform at a higher level. Then we move into what I call mental yielding. And mental yielding is used through some of the same awareness training as physical yielding, in that when we start to notice those things inside of ourselves, now we also start to see things a little bit more clearly in other people and are a little bit more hypersensitive to subtle shifts in their body language or their tone of voice or even just their energetic expression. And when we can see things and be more in tune with these, now say you and I are having a conversation and I say something that slightly unsettles you, if I pick up on it right from the start, it's a lot easier to adjust the conversation and keep us in a happy place than if I'm not paying attention to that. Pretty soon I'm so far off track, you want to knock me upside the head. And so learning how to use yielding in all of our interactions is very powerful. And, one, you're just being a little bit more considerate, which is a good thing, I think, to incorporate in everybody's lives. But two, you can use this strategically in relationships and business and sales and negotiations and strategy to get the desired outcome with the least amount of resistance. And if you ever read any military history or study any war strategies, they used yielding all the time in their development and strategies and in coming to conflict. And so there's many applications for this. Then the third branch of yielding that I break it down into is called emotional yielding. Emotional yielding is very much like mental yielding, but it's with your own interpersonal conflicts. So you think about oftentimes something will happen to us and we'll respond and we'll go down this path and we might get an hour, a day, a week down that road and realize maybe that wasn't the best choice. But with yielding, if we could have been aware enough to take a step back when it happened and evaluate all of our options, a lot of times we can make a more educated choice on the other side and lead us in a better direction with, again, the least amount of resistance. And, I've been explaining this concept to people for years. I've been running my academy for 30 years now. And one of the most common things I hear people say is that, oh, it makes a lot of sense. I do that all the time. And I would agree with that, and that everybody does this to some degree all the time. However, it's kind of like, if you or I were to walk into a crime scene with a detective who's been on the job for 30 years, I know at least for me, he would see things about that scene and the series of events that I would have no clue of. And the meditative arts helps us see things internally in ourselves and in other people that I feel like most people will never have any idea of, and they never will unless they adopt a meditative practice to learn how to develop that more in tune sense of awareness and higher sensitivity. And another way that you can look at this as well is in athletics. So you think about if you have a good seasoned athlete who's disciplined, he's always on time, he's always there, wants to learn, wants to train. For a coach, it's easy to get that person to 85% of their potential. But to get them to 90%, 95%, 97%, now you're talking about the greats, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, who almost seem magical when you watch them play. Well, I feel like with this kind of awareness training and observation and these kind of yielding skills, that there's no way that you can get to that 95, 97% without a practice like this.
Mhm. Absolutely.
I just really want to, I just want to acknowledge this and just remind folks that are listening. This is Chi Talks with Javi, Nona, and Tony. And our guest today is Jeff Patterson, author of The Yielding Warrior. So I was introduced to this concept of yielding through our teacher, Dr. Young. And for folks that don't know, Jeff Patterson actually visited Humboldt County many times to come train with us on the mountain with Dr. Young. I think you weren't able to cross paths with Nona, but I know for a lot of the summers you were there studying with us. And it was through this, through Dr. Young's curriculum, along with listening energy, understanding energy, rooting energy, neutralizing energy. We learned this concept and this concept of yielding energy. I realized as a martial arts student for many years, I realized I had to embody this strategy because I was always a smaller competitor to the larger, and it gave me an avenue to focus my attention and energy and say, oh, I can really focus and hone in on this strategy to stay alive, if for lack of a better term. One of the things I wanted to offer was this concept of east and west and construct, and maybe even thinking, and maybe even like in martial arts, soft and hard practices and strategies. Because I would say from like a Western perspective or point of view, this softness, it can be misinterpreted as weakness. And so yielding can be misinterpreted as giving. So maybe you can expand on that. I remember there was a story in your book about someone who's practicing and says, why would I give them, you say, why, the student asks you, well, why would I give them like something that they're trying to get? And then your response is like, think about it as just kind of shifting your position.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
I think that a lot of people do have that misconception, especially if they're A-type personalities and hard chargers, you know, and they're used to like going after, if they're in athletics and they have that forward drive all the time. When you start talking to them about yielding, their first instinct oftentimes is that I don't want to give up. I can make this happen, you know, and yes, oftentimes maybe they can make it happen, but the goal is, and this is why somebody like Michael Jordan is so great, if you can make it happen and it takes 100% of your effort to make it happen, or you can make it happen and it looks like you're playing with a 2-year-old, which one is better, right? So it takes a lot less energy if you can do this with that yielding concept. And the idea of yielding is not to give up, it's to reposition yourself to have the best line towards the positive outcome that you want to see. And now sometimes there is some struggle involved. It's not always just collapsing, right? But it's the least amount of resistance to get that positive outcome, which is why it's so powerful.
Yeah, it does take a tremendous self-rootedness in order to be yielding and not wavering simultaneously, because you are trying to face a lot of the extremes within yourself simultaneously with whatever has been projected upon you in that moment. So I think it does the self-examination part of it is pretty deep, and the self-restraint and the self-discipline part of it is also incredibly deep, and you have to have all of those in order to exercise yielding without giving up or faltering or thinking of yourself as a weaker link.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the discipline is such an important topic because, I again, after teaching for 30 years, I've had thousands of students come through the academy. And, one of the most common things I'll hear people say is, I can't meditate, or I can't do this because I can't quiet my mind. Well, one, they're probably not very disciplined. And two, they have a misconception on what meditative arts are all about. It's not about every time you go practice, you have to reach this state of nirvana and be off in bliss somewhere. It's about developing the skill set, whether you're doing a sitting practice, a standing meditation, a movement meditation like Tai Chi or Qigong or whatever it is that you're doing, and learning how to, if I'm doing a sitting practice and I get distracted, how do I bring myself back to center? Am I using my breath? Am I using my posture? Am I using a movement? And every time you get that repetition of getting off center, distracted, and coming back to center, and you do that over and over again through a daily ritual practice, you start getting strong and learning how to come out of any distraction and finding that center. And now, when you can do that in your meditative practice, because you're doing a daily ritual practice and consistent with that, which is the most important part of any meditation training, no matter what it is you're doing. By doing this, now when you're walking down the street and somebody says something to you, and even if it throws you off, it's a lot easier because you've had so many reps on being distracted to come back to center. And now we can respond with an educated response. and use that idea of yielding, because we're not coming from an emotional disturbance. And it's so important to be able to do that. And, a lot of times people think that meditation is something they can do once in a while and it'll help de-stress them. Well, maybe there's some truth to that, but really the meditative arts are meant to be a way of life. And it doesn't mean that you need to go retire to a cave and meditate every day. But even if you just did a 20-minute session of meditation every day and integrated some active practices, and what I mean by active practices are, say, every hour, every 90 minutes, you come back and count out 10 breaths, or do some movement exercises or spinal rotations or something to bring your awareness back into the body. Now, when through time, we start to develop a deeper connection and have more ability and awareness to use that yielding concept in anything we do.
Oh, it's definitely, it definitely works. It definitely brings forth the higher being within us to be able to reflect on that moment and be able to put ourselves in a non-distracted way at ease or immediately. That requires many, many, many years of practice and training. Yeah.
I'm curious if we can talk a little bit about the emotional journey, whether in like a particular moment or maybe throughout the long journey. And interestingly, we've got a female amongst us, but amongst men, the emotional, let's just say there's a area, it's an area of opportunity, if you will. And it sounds like this yielding concept connects with that area of opportunity. And I would like to maybe tease that out a little bit and see how mechanistically they interface. No? What do you think?
Well, I wouldn't limit it to men though either.
Oh,
I
sure.
would say,
Okay, well, I'm a man, I can only
a
speak.
human,
A human
a
being.
human being.
Yeah, so that
Sure.
for me, on the emotional side of it, in the beginning, it was very challenging, which I think it is probably for anybody taking on a new practice. While I did have a pretty strong inspiration with the coach who was guiding me, I remember when he first started training me, he gave me the first few movements of a Tai Chi form that you could show somebody in one session. He told me if I really wanted to get good, I should be doing an hour a day of practice. So every day, every time he told me anything, first off, I treated it like it was gold, and I wanted to do it, at least what he told me, and so I was doing about an hour and a half every day because I wanted to impress him. Well, a couple months rolls by, 2, 3, 4 months goes in, and he never showed me anything else. And I'm thinking, man, is this guy ever going to show me anything? What am I doing here? I'm doing these same 3 movements over and over again for an hour and a half every day. And I started getting really frustrated, and it was messing with my emotions. And I'm sure when I went to the boxing gym, he recognized that and picked up on that and noticed that I was going through that struggle. And you know, I think that struggle in any martial art or internal art practitioner is learning how to conquer yourself, which is such a valuable lesson. Well, it wasn't until about the 6th or 7th month mark where I went down in my basement one morning to do my practice, and I looked up at the clock, and an hour and a half had gone by, and it seemed like 15 minutes. And I was just surprised. I couldn't understand or explain what happened. And from that point on, I was hooked. And, I went from, in a short period of time, of having boxing be my main thing to having the meditative arts be my main thing, and really start focusing and investigating and seeking out different teachers and looking to expand that. And I know that he was waiting for that to happen, because right after I went through that realization, it was only 2 or 3 weeks later, he basically showed me the rest of the form in a few weeks. And so he was just waiting for me to get that idea. And we all do that. You know, we go into a practice like this, whether it's a sitting meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, whatever it is. And if we don't take the time to invest in ourselves and really come to that understanding of what the practice is all about, then we miss all the gold on the other side. And that's why, you know, with my students here, I always try when, you know, when they first walk in the door, I'll tell them before they ever become a member here at the academy, is like, you know, one of the expectations here is that you do at least 20 minutes a day of a ritual practice and integrate some of these active practices. And if if you can't commit to that, it's probably not the right place for you. And whether I'm throwing away money or not, that's not what's important. What's important is I want them to come here and be successful. And I feel like if I don't tell them that straight up, that they don't have the right expectations and don't know what to expect. And I think for anybody out there who's thinking of how to deepen their practice or to even start a meditative practice, you really want to sit down and think about what are all the strong reasons, what are all the whys, why you want to take the practice on. Are you looking to improve your performance or get better health? Or you just wanting to stay more mobile and as you age? What is it for you? And really think about those and list as many as you can think of, because tomorrow morning when you wake up and you don't want to get up when the alarm goes off to do your practice, what's going to pull you out of bed? You know, Dr. Young always says you got to find your own whip, right? And so you've got to be able to have that why, that drive, that's something that motivates you to get out there and do it for yourself, because nobody else is going to do it for you.
That's
Nobody
right.
can do it for you.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, and it's so hard to explain that to somebody who hasn't had the experience yet. So, you know, if your teacher was to tell you, you know, this is why, or it would be very different than the experience that you went through, and that visceral, you know, it makes it that real tangible thing. But I really appreciate the way that you make meditation relevant and yielding relevant for all people, not just martial artists. And the fact that your book, you know, then moves into part 2, moves into the skills of communication. I really, when I was looking through your material, would love to focus a little bit more on that piece and how that's appeared for you, and maybe give a few examples of that, some concrete examples where that has applied. Maybe share that with the audience.
Which aspect you're saying?
The communication.
Oh, yeah.
Yielding and communication, because I feel like a lot of our human mishaps and issues in the world, you know, both personally within, you know, relationships in your immediate circle, and also globally with between countries and larger, really lies in a bunch of communication issues that come up, and the inability to do this yielding work. And but to understand, for especially for someone who doesn't practice yielding and who doesn't do martial arts, how would you, a few concrete examples would be great to really illustrate the power of this.
Yielding and communication.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first, you mentioned, I want to touch on something before we get into that. You mentioned, which is something that I enjoy the question or the direction you were going, in that nobody can do it for you. You know, there's so many times that you learn something, and I'm sure you guys have both experienced this, you know, you've had such a great teacher, in that you'll learn something and you'll be, that's what he's talking about. And then a year, 5 years, 10 years goes by and you're like, oh, now I get it. You know, and if you don't put in the time and invest in the effort to do it, you never see beyond the surface level. And a lot of like the real benefits of the practice come through putting in that work. And so it's something out there to just make a note of. And while, you know, kind of coming back to when I was explaining yielding, you know, a lot of people will say, I understand that. I do that all the time. But how deep do they really know it, right? And those realizations, and that's one of the things that I've always loved with the meditative arts, is that those realizations keep coming. The more that you invest, I'm still learning things from teachers I had 30 years ago because I'm practicing what they've taught. And now I'm approaching it with a more educated mind, a more educated practice, and it's giving me a new understanding of it. And so that's one of the things that I've always really loved about this practice is that, you're, in my opinion, you're never the master. And there's some very skillful teachers out there, but there's so much to always keep growing from and learning from. I just think it's impossible to master the skill of meditation. When you come, kind of moving into the communication side of things, there's so many things to look at with communication. And I think a couple of the most important ones. One is being considerate. One of my old meditation teachers, he always told me that, the strongest love potion is consideration. And it applies in so many ways, not just conversation, but in every area in life. And then the other aspect is listening. And being able to truly listen means we have to be aware and we have to be, a lot of times when you're talking to somebody, you can just see it in their face. They just can't wait till you're done. They're already thinking of 5 questions they have to ask you. And then they're not even really taking to heart or paying attention to what you have to say. And if you don't listen closely and experience the energy and the feeling that's coming behind the words, and all you're doing is trying to focus on the words, you have a very shallow idea of communication and what it's all about. Because I've read numerous studies on communication, and most of our meaning behind communication is expressed through body language and facial expressions, a lot more so than just the words that are being spoken, and the tone and energy behind the words is much more important.
I hear you on that, and I think the idea of listening sometimes requires a sense of calmness within oneself, because even as we are speaking, we are listening to ourselves, and sometimes we don't even know what we are saying. There's a disconnect. So when it comes to listening to another person speaking and simultaneously we're thinking about the things we want to say, we miss a lot along the way. A lot goes unnoticed and a lot goes unaddressed, and the body language at that moment and the feeling that's coming, that sense of the resonance that's coming out of the body while someone is speaking, sometimes conveys much more of the messages than the words that are coming out, because it does require, in order to convey your thoughts and to be simultaneously in the body with what you're thinking and what you're saying, it requires also another state of meditation, a heightened state of being, in order to arrive at that. And a lot of us have more ideas than embodied ideas, which ends up being, I think, where our communication gets misplaced and goes a different direction from where we're trying to go. I'm wondering, Jeff, if you've encountered or you've worked with the retired personnel from the armed forces, and if you work with any personnel with PTSD, and how the sense of how you were you if you have, and how you were able to convey the idea of yielding to someone who's been touched by war or touched by combat in an entirely different way than the experience that you've had, because it seems that you jumped into, you were in that aspect of it with a lot more maturity than most people your age, which I think it goes with your discipline and your excitement about being a warrior from the outside and the inside as well. So I'm wondering if you have shared your practice with veterans with PTSD and how that impact was on them. And if you can share a little bit of that, I'd be very interested. But for personal reasons, because I grew up in Beirut, and I was actually I was 10 years old when I was conscripted into the militia, and I was in combat from 10 till about 20 till I came to the United States. And my work for the first 20, 30 years has been trying to overcome all of the different embattlements that were going on within me and within the structure of the culture that I was born in. And I work a lot with veterans and with people who have been in tremendous trauma, and a lot of the times it's really the trauma is ahead of them. And so and if you can expand on this a little bit, how do you apply the yielding to someone who's about 10 miles ahead of themselves with their reactions?
Yes. So, great question. And I've always had a place in my heart for people that have served their country and put themselves and their lives in danger to fight for the people they care about, and it's through the years, I have had a lot of veterans come through the academy many times over, and some of them have suffered from PTSD. And I think this kind of goes hand in hand with anybody taking on the practice. A lot of people come to meditation, maybe not just from PTSD, from the military backgrounds, but they come because they're depressed. I've had students coming in thinking about killing themselves. I've had, just anything you could think of, it's happened. And the the most important thing is finding something that they can resonate with, that can give them a positive view. And so, like, for some people, you tell them to sit for 20 minutes and it drives them nutty. They go crazy. But maybe for that person, integrating some movement practices, something that they can get some enjoyment out of and really kind of start to settle down and start to approach that path. I think you kind of have to have a different prescription for everybody, and not everybody's the same. And when you talk about building a life practice around meditation, I think it's real important to realize, one, you have to have some kind of a ritual practice, active practice, and philosophical practices. And it's always should be evolving. You're always changing day to day, year to year, and always growing and developing new understandings and learning how to grow with that practice. And so when you have somebody who has a stress disorder of some sort, when you can give them something to look forward to, something that's positive that they have enjoyment out of, now they start letting their guard down and they start trying to come back to who they really are. Because what happens is those things happen in our lives, and a lot of times we relive that over and over again, and we can't get it out of our head, and we're thinking about something that maybe we did or something that happened to us, and that's who we are. But that's not who we are. And meditation teaches us to come back to who we are and realize that those things are not us. And when you can detach from those and find practices that help you kind of focus on coming back to who you are, I always love how Dr. Young used to talk about wearing the mask, and we all do that. Every day we go through life, we're worried about what somebody's going to say or how they feel, and we're wearing this mask all day, every day. A lot of times we do that so much, we go to look at ourselves in the mirror and we're still seeing the mask and we don't even remember who we really are. And the meditative arts help us come back to who we are so we can get beyond the things that happen to us or the things that we're anticipating happening to us in the future, and just live more in the present. And that's really what it's all about.
This is Talking Chi with Tony and Nona. I'm Javi. Our guest today is Jeff Patterson, longtime student and teacher of various martial arts and author of The Yielding Warrior, which we're talking about today.
Yeah. I love what you're saying about giving the mind something to look forward to. It sounds like mind regulation. If you talk about the 5 regulations, Dr. Young talks about how
using
the energy go, yeah,
to
how the,
regulate your mind.
yeah.
That's what comes to mind for me.
And how the energy goes, where the mind goes, and if a person's stuck in this loop of the mind being constantly either what Tony said on the future of what could possibly happen or on the path, then breaking that cycle somehow, whether it's by just a sitting practice or by a movement meditation practice, that really draws the mind to something positive, draws the energy there, and then that flow can happen, which is ultimately where the health comes from, right? Is where you have instead of a knot being constantly reinforced, you've got some energy flow happening all of a sudden. And
You're bringing that Qigong aspect into it in terms of like a knot, an energy knot, and then some sort of massaging of the knot to facilitate a flow.
yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what comes to mind when I hear you say that. That's give them something positive, and it might not be appropriate for them to have a sitting practice. It might be better for them to be moving, and I think that's something said about getting the blood flowing and utilizing the other aspects to help the mind as well, because you can regulate the mindscape. I wanted to touch on something that comes up for me because my original meditative practice is not in modalities of conflict. So I'm a big time meditator, yoga practitioner, but then I came to Tai Chi later on, and I find value like comparing those different modalities. There's some value in martial arts practice and martial arts rooted practices where it brings to light the reality of a situation of conflict and that interaction with another energetic force that might be oppositional or even attacking or threatening to your energy, life flow, internal self place from which you interface with the external world. And really, you need that as a foundation. However, if you're not used to high degrees of external stressors or coming in, it can still be offsetting. So it's interesting that there's this philosophy of the yielding that happens in the interface of those energies. And when you were talking about how you can utilize yielding to get I think you said get a positive outcome that you're looking for, that for some people that focus on the positive outcome is what kind of conflicts with that deep listening that's required to in when we talk about Tai Chi, we talk about the want of harmonizing, the goal of harmonizing with that, even an energetic that's adversarial, right? And so I guess my question is, when you're faced with this conflict of perhaps your own desire for an outcome and listening, what happens there? What can happen there? And how do you negotiate those things of having a desired outcome, but also having that need to listen?
Well, I think that having the ability to truly listen and to be present gives you the tools needed to direct towards that positive outcome without having to have as much struggle, right? So if I'm not really listening to everything you say and I'm not paying attention and I'm just waiting to get the outcome that I want, then a lot of times it's going to be me pushing you in the direction of what I want. But if I can really take to heart what you're saying and try to harmonize with that some way and then guide us both down the path towards where I want to go, if we're talking about conversations, this is really important. In martial arts, it's very similar, right? So if I want to get you on the ground and I'm looking to do a takedown on you, and I don't think about where you want to go, and you come at me and I just try to pile through you, it's only going to work one way. But if I wait till you come at me and I see where you're going and I kind of take that momentum and move, and now I get you to go where I want to go because I was listening to you. And it works the same way in conversation. It works the same way when you're doing push hands. It works the same way when you're doing your Tai Chi form, except for like when you're doing your Tai Chi form, it's all with your own interpersonal energies and conflicts and things that are going on in your head. And you mentioned the 5 regulations. That's so important in any meditative practice, is to be able to have an understanding of what those 5 regulations are, because without all of them working in unison, it's hard to reach a real deep level of practice. I hope that answers the question as far as the communication side of things.
So it sounds like the yielding part is actually when you are able to listen, the yielding is able to happen because you're paying attention. I guess another guest at the mountain said, I'm just helping you out with your will. So if that other person, and say in a physical martial practice, is coming at you, going in a certain direction, you're saying that I'm going to take your will and match it with mine, and we'll come out with this other outcome together. So instead of going up against that direction, you're going with it and creating a better outcome for yourself as well.
Yes. And, when you learn how to do that physically or in conversation, it gains so much power because, I think about it like in martial arts, which is the easiest kind of way to see it, is if I want to throw you on the ground, if I wait until I feel your energy going there and then I help you go the way you want to go, but get you where I want to go, it makes it to where, like Grandmaster Helio Gracie, who was really famous for taking on challenges from anybody, he was only 139 pounds. And for a guy, that's a pretty small guy. And he was taking on fights from people that were 250, 260, some big monster dudes. And he would come out on top and win those encounters. And I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of him, but he was not a yoked out guy. He was skinny. He almost looked a little sickly, if anything. And if he didn't understand how to use the concept of yielding and to ride that energy, there's no way he would have been as successful as he was. And even if you just even go back just 30 years ago and look at the first UFC fights with Royce Gracie, he didn't look like a physical specimen by any means, but he was very talented, very good at yielding, and had a good understanding of jiu-jitsu, and that's what made him so successful.
Yeah, he took some major hits though, and but still on top. And
Yeah.
yeah, well, I guess for anything, in order for it to go forward, it has to yield first. It cannot. It's impossible. The image that comes to mind is the image of the undertow. For example, there's nothing more powerful than being in a wave that's going in the undertow and how it sucks you down. That's in order for the greater wave to come through, the wave that has come before it is yielding under it, and it's sucking energy from it. So yielding is an incredibly empowered state of being too, because it has the way of sucking the energy out of that which is coming at you and then flipping it over to come from on top. And it's an incredibly powerful. It's not for the faint of heart or the weak of heart at all. It's not a stance of weakness. It's actually an incredibly intelligent and mature stance, and very few people can pull it through in combat situation or in an emotional situation. In some of your podcasts, you talked about catching it on the onset, just before it begins, before it starts to percolate and become something bigger than it is. If you don't mind speaking a little bit about your attention to that and how you grab that, and what are some of the signs that to you make you that gives it out to you that, okay, no, I see there is some aspect of it here that's occurring, and yielding must be employed.
Yes, so that's a very important topic, especially for a martial artist. If you've ever tried boxing before, if you wait until you see the punch coming, you're already hit, and it's a very fast-paced game. And you have to develop that sensitivity and that awareness, which comes from a meditative practice. And eventually, you'll see, like, if you ever look at a good boxer up closely, pay attention to how focused they are and how in tune and how present they are. They noticed every little half-ounce transfer from one side to the other. There's nothing that they don't pick up on. And that sense of present awareness is key in being successful with yielding, because if you can, I always tell people to think about an avalanche. If you pick up the pebble before it gains momentum and knocks down the other rocks, it's easy to stop. But once all the rocks are rolling down the hill, you're in trouble. And so yielding is very much like that. And it goes like that in conversations as well. If I say something to you and I get you so riled up and so upset at me that, you're 10 minutes into it and you're just fuming, it's really hard to yield and get you in a positive place. But if I notice as soon as I say something that it unsettles you a little bit, I'm like, maybe that's not the right path to follow. And then you start yielding to that idea. It's helps you get to that positive area with the least amount of conflict, which is what it's all about. And, you brought up the idea of the wave, which I really like, in that it is very much like yin and yang, and the energies in yin and yang. You always have to have a giving and a taking, right? But that giving and a taking, if you look at the yin yang symbol, it changes from the amount of yin and the amount of yang at any one point, and it's never the same. Yielding is very much like that. You take something and then you start to move it more towards balance. And I go into a little bit more detail in that in the book, but that's kind of what the whole idea of yielding is about. Just one thing I'd like to throw out there, if anybody is interested, I have free copies of the book out there. If you go to yieldingwarrior.com/book, you're welcome to grab a free copy of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We've got about 5 more minutes. Let's just have some final words. What's the takeaway?
I think for somebody to start the practice, the most important thing is to make the decision to start a ritual practice. And, the Dalai Lama once said, everybody should meditate for 20 minutes a day. Unless you're too busy, you should meditate for an hour. Everybody should be able to have 20 minutes a day that you can invest in yourself and come back to just checking in with your heart and seeing who you are. And once you make that decision, then it's pretty easy. You could pick up a sitting practice, standing meditation, Qigong, Tai Chi. I mean, there's so many different directions you could go. There's a lot of options within the book you're welcome to check out. I also have my online program at theyieldingwarrior.com. You're welcome to check that out as well. And yeah, if there's a good, solid teacher in your area, it's always good to go get some in-person training as well.
I think
There's a little bit of a connection issue, and I just wanted to know if Tony would like to say something before.
Thank you. Definitely. I'm in cahoots with the way of the yielding warrior, because I think being considerate in today's time is really being an exceptional human being, because there's so many things that are occurring that require so many consideration, and no one is taking consideration. So, yielding is an incredible path, and definitely gives us a lot more compassion to the state of the world and how things are occurring. So thank you so much, Jeff, and congratulations for your insights and You know, congratulations on the path and all that you're bringing, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure to get the chance to chat with you, and I wish you guys the best.
Thank you guys. I
Thank you.
really appreciate it. Great book.
Yeah.
I think the society could benefit from the yielding practice. So this is great that you make it so relevant for everyone. Nice,
Yeah.
nice to
It-
hear you talk about meditation as well.
It's been great to get a chance to chat with you guys. Javi, it's great to see you again.
You as well, Jeff. Please take care and
Yeah.
keep doing the great work.
All right, you too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Tony.